Teenage twins murder their mother over reluctance to attend school. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The twins sat in their room, faces pale, eyes wide. A small clock ticked on the wall. The hands moved slowly. School. They didn't want to go. Not today. Not ever again. Their mother had told them, "Get up. Get dressed." The twins had refused. She shouted, but they didn't care. A heavy silence filled the space between them. Then she came to their door. Her footsteps echoed in the hallway. They could hear her breathing. Short. Quick. Angry. Her voice cracked. "You're going." They exchanged a glance. A strange calm washed over them. They had a plan. A dark one. It wasn't their first idea, but it was the easiest. They knew what had to be done. The door opened. Their mother stood there, her hands on her hips. She looked at them, eyes narrowing. "Do you think you can get away with this?" They didn't answer. They just stared. One twin, the older of the two, moved first. Quietly, with purpose. He grabbed the heavy metal lamp from the nightstand. He swung it hard, without hesitation. The crash was deafening. Their mother stumbled, stunned. The room smelled of fear. Blood began to pool on the floor. The other twin stood frozen, watching. No words. Only silence now. The lamp was on the ground, twisted and bent. Their mother gasped, her hand clutching her throat. She couldn't speak. The twins moved closer. Their faces showed no emotion. The second twin raised his hand. A knife glinted in the dim light. No sound. Only the soft breath of their mother, struggling. They were numb. This wasn't new. They had done things like this before. Their mother never understood them. Never really cared. Now, she would never care again. The room felt colder. The darkness seemed to swallow everything. The twins stood there, side by side. And then they watched, as her life slipped away. A quiet breath. And then nothing. They didn't say a word. The silence wrapped around them like a cold blanket. They walked out of the room. Their steps slow, unhurried. They didn't feel fear. They didn't feel guilt. Just relief. The clock kept ticking. Time moved on. But for them it had stopped. The house was still. The twins were free. But were they? The door slammed shut behind them. They stood in the hallway, breath steady. Nothing moved. No sound, except the echo of their footsteps. They looked at each other. No words passed between them. Not yet. The world outside was the same. But inside, everything had changed. They didn't know what to do next. Everything had been so clear. So easy. Now there was a hollow space between them. A feeling they couldn't place. A strange emptiness. The front door was wide open. The morning sun poured in. But it didn't feel warm. It felt cold. Like the house was holding its breath. Waiting. They stepped outside, but didn't look back. The street was quiet. Neighbors still asleep. Life moved on, unaware. But they weren't sure how to keep moving. They stood there, in the middle of the yard. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of fresh earth. It felt wrong. The breeze didn't feel like freedom. It felt like something was closing in. A shadow. A heavy weight pressing down on them. The older twin turned his head. He saw something in the distance. A figure. Standing in the driveway. Someone they didn't recognize. A stranger. He blinked. But when he looked again, the figure was gone. The air felt thick. Too thick. Something was off. He could feel it. His heart beat faster. His eyes scanned the yard. The younger twin didn't notice. He was staring at the house, eyes wide. There was something about the house. Something strange. The windows felt like eyes. Watching them. Waiting. A chill ran down their spines. They hadn't heard a car. No footsteps. No warning. The street was still empty. But then, a sound. A voice. It wasn't their mother's. But it was familiar. A low, guttural hum. The older twin felt his stomach twist. It was coming from inside the house. A voice. Soft, like a whisper, but louder. It called their names. Their hearts skipped. They couldn't move. It was their mother's voice.
Or was it?
The air felt suffocating. The wind stopped. Dead silence. They didn't want to go back inside. But they had no choice. They turned slowly. The door was still open. The house beckoned them. Unseen eyes were watching, waiting for them to return. With every step closer, the house seemed to breathe. Closer, closer, until they were at the door. And then, the door creaked shut behind them. The house felt colder now.
Darker.
The air heavy with something unspoken. The twins stood still, eyes scanning the dim hallway. It wasn't the same. The house was different. The walls seemed closer. The shadows darker. A low, familiar hum still echoed, vibrating the air. It was the sound of their mother's voice, but distorted, twisted, like something that didn't belong. They walked down the hallway, each step hesitant. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet. The house felt alive, like it was watching them. The living room was empty, but something shifted in the air. A faint movement in the corner of their vision. The twins turned quickly. Nothing. Just the dark corners of the room. But the feeling lingered. A presence. A shadow in the corner that didn't belong. The hum grew louder. It seemed to come from the walls now. The ceiling. From everywhere. Their mother's voice distorted. It sounded like pleading. Like something alive, trapped inside the house. The twins froze. The older twin's heart began to race. He grabbed his brother's arm. They had to leave. But as they turned to go, the hallway stretched longer. Too long. The door to the outside was now impossibly far. The walls seemed to shift, pulse, breathe. A sudden cold wind hit them, though the windows were shut tight. They heard something heavy in the distance. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Their mother's footsteps. But she was...
No.
She couldn't be. The older twin's breath caught in his throat. The voice. The voice wasn't her anymore. It wasn't her at all. It was something else. Something worse. And then, the footsteps stopped. Just behind them. They turned slowly. But there was nothing there. Nothing but the dark. The voice. It whispered again. Their names. It was too close now. Breathing. A rasping, guttural sound. A clawed hand reached from the shadows. It grabbed the older twin's shoulder. He screamed. But his brother was already gone. Vanished. Without a sound. The house held them in its grip. The walls closed in. The hum, louder now, vibrated their bones. It shook them to their core. The older twin's mind was spinning. What was happening? What had they done? Had they made a mistake? The hand tightened. He turned, but there was nothing there. The air was thick with something wrong. Then, a voice. A soft whisper in his ear. You thought you were free. The twin's breath caught. It was his mother's voice, soft, mournful. But it was too late now. Too late for everything. And the house, it wasn't done yet. The air grew heavier. A suffocating weight pressed on his chest. The voice lingered, curling around his mind. You thought you could escape me. The twins stumbled backward, eyes wide. The walls pulsed. The shadows seemed to shift and grow. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Every thought was drowned by the whispering. The house was alive. Alive with something dark. Something ancient. It wasn't his mother anymore. It couldn't be. She was gone. But the voice. It knew them. It knew everything. He turned to look for his brother. Where are you? But the house was silent. The hallways stretched endlessly, a maze of shifting walls. He reached for the door, the handle slick with cold sweat. His fingers trembled. The room behind him was darker now. Too dark. He couldn't see anything. But he felt it. Something watching him. Something waiting. A cold hand brushed the back of his neck. He spun around. Nothing. But the air was thick with the stench of decay. His heart pounded. His breath shallow, ragged. He was suffocating in this house, in this prison. You can't leave. The voice again. Closer this time. A soft, hollow laugh. He pressed his back against the door, eyes darting around. The shadows were alive. Flickering. Dancing. Reaching for him. It was impossible to escape. The house was the trap. It was never just her. The voice whispered. You should have known better. The twins' legs gave way. He collapsed to the floor. The laughter grew louder. It echoed through the walls. Around him, in his ears. His breath came in short bursts. Terror clawed at his insides. His body shaking uncontrollably. And then, a sound. A scraping. Something dragging across the floor. His gaze shot to the darkened hallway. It was a shape. A form. A shadow. Slowly it emerged. It was a figure.
Tall.
Impossible to discern clearly. But there was no mistaking the shape. It was his mother. Or what had been his mother. Her eyes were hollow. Empty sockets. Her skin pale, stretched tight over her bones. Her mouth, wide open. A grotesque, silent scream. She didn't walk. She dragged herself toward him. Her limbs twisted unnaturally, breaking with every movement. But she kept coming. Closer. Closer. His heart raced. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in tighter with every step she took. Her body jerked. Her skin split. A foul, rotten stench filled the air. He couldn't escape. There was nowhere to run. You killed me. The words hissed through her shattered teeth. Now you will pay. Her hand reached for him. Cold fingers brushed his face. And everything went black. He woke with a gasp. The darkness was absolute. His body felt numb. He tried to move, but his limbs were heavy, unresponsive. The air around him was thick, like it was pressing against his chest, suffocating him. He blinked, trying to make sense of his surroundings. But there was nothing. Nothing but blackness. No walls.
No door.
No windows. Just emptiness. His breath caught in his throat. Where was he? Was this the afterlife? Had he died? Had the house claimed him? But then, a flicker of light. A tiny, dim glow. It appeared in the distance, barely visible. His heart skipped. Was it the door? He forced himself to his feet, though his legs felt weak. He stumbled toward the light, dragging his body along as if it were a distant dream. The light grew brighter. Closer. It was a doorway. An open door. The hallway beyond was blurry at first. But the closer he got, the clearer it became. His hands were shaking now. What was on the other side? His breath grew shallow as he reached the threshold. The dim hallway stretched before him. It was the same house, but somehow different. The walls seemed to breathe. The shadows clung to every corner. He stepped inside. The door slammed shut behind him, and a cold wind blew from the far end of the hall. He froze. The air was thick again.
Too thick.
And then, a voice.
Low. Gravelly.
You shouldn't have come back. It was her voice again. But something was off. Twisted. He turned, but no one was there. The hallway stretched longer again, as if mocking him. He heard footsteps. Heavy, slow. They were coming closer. But there was no one.
Just the sound.
The smell of decay. The footsteps stopped behind him. A soft, sickly laugh filled the space. It sent a chill down his spine. He whipped around. Nothing. But the shadows had deepened. They were no longer just dark corners. They were alive. Shifting. Growing. His pulse quickened. You can't escape me. The voice was everywhere now. In his head. In his blood. The walls pulsated with it, reverberating through his chest. The shadows began to form shapes. Figures. Twisted, contorted shapes. Like broken limbs stretched beyond reason. They reached for him. The air felt too tight. The walls, too close. The house was closing in on him. His legs gave way again. But he had no time to fall. The shadows were upon him. Grabbing. Tearing. His screams echoed, but there was no one to hear. The pain was unbearable. And then he understood. The house had never let them go. It had only been waiting. Waiting for them to return. For the twins to realize that the house had always owned them. And now you're mine. The voice whispered one last time. And then, there was nothing. The light faded. The shadows swallowed everything. And the house. was silent once more. The silence was suffocating, an all-consuming quiet that stretched on forever.
There were no sounds now.
No footsteps, no voices, only the heavy weight of the darkness pressing in from every direction. He couldn't feel his body, couldn't remember what it was like to be alive. The only thing left was the void. And then, a flicker, a tiny sliver of light. It sparked to life in the far distance, just like before. The faint glow seemed to pulse, beckoning him. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. But he could feel the light calling to him, urging him forward. He was drawn to it, dragged by some invisible force. His feet moved of their own accord. The light grew stronger, brighter, until it filled the space, blinding him. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was somewhere else. The house was gone. The hallway, the walls, the suffocating air. They were all gone. He was standing in a vast, empty void. A void that stretched endlessly in every direction. No walls. No corners. Just infinite, oppressive darkness. And that damn light. It was right in front of him now, glowing softly, like the last breath of hope. He reached for it. His fingers trembled as they grazed the surface of the light. But the moment he touched it, a shock ran through him. A sharp, searing pain that made him gasp. It felt like his very soul was being pulled apart. He tried to pull his hand away, but it was trapped. The light burned, and he screamed. But no sound came out. The pain intensified. It felt like it was tearing through his bones, his skin, his very essence. "You're not free." The voice again. So close now, it was like it was inside his mind. "You're never free." The light pulsed violently. A tremor ran through the void, a ripple in the fabric of reality. He wanted to tear himself away, but it was no use. The light was consuming him. He was becoming it. And then the voice laughed. A twisted, cruel laugh that echoed in his skull. "The house isn't done with you."
He felt his body shifting, changing.
Molding. The pain became unbearable, and his screams, his silent screams, ripped through the dark. He realized too late. The house had never been a place. It had never been a home. It was a thing, a force, a living nightmare.
And it wanted them.
It fed on them. And now they were part of it. Forever. The darkness enveloped him completely. The light flickered once more, then vanished. And the void was silent once again. But then a sound. A faint whisper. A shuffling, almost imperceptible. The twin felt something stir. A presence. It was distant at first, but slowly it began to grow louder. The shadows that surrounded him started to shift.
Move. Twitch.
Like something was waking. The twin's breath caught. He couldn't see it, but he could feel it.
The eyes.
Those eyes, they were watching him star. He tried to scream, but no sound came. His body was frozen, locked in place. Every muscle stiffened, as if something was holding him back. The darkness thickened, coiling around his limbs.
Tighter. Tighter.
Then a sudden snap. A crack. And the walls of the void shifted. They pulsed, bending inward, warping. The twin could see shapes forming. Distorted, twisted silhouette star. They moved closer. Closer. Figures emerged from the shadows, like broken versions of his past. They were distorted, disfigured, their faces stretched into grotesque, silent screams. The twin's heart hammered in his chest. He could feel their eyes. But they didn't look like people.
No.
They weren't human anymore. They were the things the house had turned them into. The souls trapped within its walls. The twin's legs shook, but he was still paralyzed. "You." The voice, that familiar voice, broke through the suffocating silence. It wasn't his mother's anymore. It had changed.
It was deeper now.
Distorted. "A part of me is in you now." The twin's stomach churned. "You are mine." The voices echoed in unison. He tried to close his eyes, but he couldn't. He couldn't escape the sight of them. The shadows danced around him, moving closer, the twisted shapes reaching toward him. He couldn't move. He could only stare. Each figure took form. His mother's face. His brother's face. But they weren't the same. Their eyes were black holes, staring at him, hungry. They reached out with crooked hands, clawing at the air. "You will join us." The older twin could feel it. The cold, clammy grip on his arms, his chest. The shadows pulled at his soul, dragging it down. He could feel himself slipping, falling. "You will never leave." The voice was everywhere now. In his ears. In his mind. Asterisk, this is your fate. This is what you are, asterisk. He was sinking, slipping into the very walls of the house. His body started to break down, dissolving into darkness, into shadows. The pain was indescribable. He could feel himself losing grip. But before everything went completely black, there was one final, terrifying realization. It wasn't just the house that was alive. The house had always been a part of him, a part of them, and now they were part of it, forever. The last breath he took was filled with the echo of his mother's voice. "Welcome home." And then nothing. The void was silent. Only the flickering shadows remained. And the house, it waited. It was patient. It was hungry. Time had no meaning here. The void was endless, stretching in all directions, like a vast ocean with no shore. No beginning. No end. Only the oppressive silence that hung in the air like a thick fog. And yet, there was something different now. A presence. A shift in the atmosphere. The twin, now lost to the darkness, felt it stir within him. It was an ache. A hunger. The hunger for more. The house, the entity that had consumed him, was not finished yet. It was feeding. Feeding off of his fear, his torment. And now it was shaping him. Shaping his very being, carving him into something new. His body felt strange. It was no longer fully his own. He could feel it changing, contorting, as though something dark was rooting itself deep within his chest. A cold, sickly sensation spread through his veins. His fingers curled into claws, twitching with an unnatural life. "You belong to me now," the voice whispered again, soft but suffocating. It was coming from everywhere. Inside his head. Inside his bones. Asterisk, you're part of me. You've always been a part of me, asterisk. The twin's heart pounded, but the beat was irregular. Out of rhythm. "We'll be together forever," the voice cooed. He could feel the walls, the very foundation of the house, closing in on him. It was alive. Alive, in ways he had never imagined. He could hear the voices of the other souls. They whispered to him now, their voices seeping into his thoughts. "Join us. You'll never escape. We are one now." The twin tried to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, his mouth moved in an unfamiliar, grotesque way. His face twisted into something unnatural. His eyes. He reached up, feeling the hollow void where his eyes had been. They were gone, replaced with endless blackness. And in that moment he realized the house had taken more than his body. It had taken his soul. "You're mine," the voice repeated, "and you will never know peace again." The shadows in the void thickened, pulling together, merging into a single mass. A shape. A face. His own face. But twisted. A reflection of the boy he had been. Asterisk, broken star. No longer human. "Welcome home," the voice sang again, almost sweetly. And then, all at once, the twin understood. This was not an end. This was a beginning. A new cycle. The house would always claim its own. And now he was part of it. A shadow. A whisper. A lost soul forever bound to the walls of the house. And somewhere, in the twisted corridors, the house waited. It was patient. It was hungry. It would never stop. Not until it had consumed every last piece of what was left. Welcome home. And in the suffocating dark, the twin was no more. In the stillness of the void, time bled together. Moments lost their meaning. But somewhere, deep within the endless black, the twin felt something stir again. A distant flicker. A pulse. A strange sensation that prickled at his awareness. Was it them? The others? The souls that the house had taken before? He could sense them, feel them, not as individuals but as a mass. A writhing, collective presence, like an ocean of lost, forgotten things, trapped in the same prison. They were there. They were watching, waiting. In the oppressive silence, a figure emerged. A shadow, but somehow different from the rest. Larger, more solid. It moved with purpose, undisturbed by the suffocating air around them. The twin felt it before he saw it, a presence. Not alone. The words slithered into his mind, uninvited. He turned slowly, trying to move, but his body, his new body, wasn't his own. It was a hollow vessel, full of whispers and shadows, and yet, there was something inside him that still burned. A flicker of recognition. The shadow stopped in front of him, and the twin's mind struggled to focus. It was the shape of a figure, but with no discernible features. A silhouette against the darkness. But there was something familiar. The twin's heart, if it could still be called a heart, thudded with panic. "What are you?" he tried to say, but his voice was nothing more than a raspy hum. The shadow's form solidified further, and for the briefest moment, the twins saw it clearly. A figure in the distance. A twisted version of his brother. The one he had abandoned. The one who had.
No.
His mind snapped back into itself. His thoughts spiraled, panicked. The figure took a step forward, and the twin instinctively recoiled, though he couldn't move fast enough. The twin brother, or the thing that used to be him, reached out a hand. A hand that flickered and blurred with each movement, like an illusion made real. "We're together now." The words, muffled, distorted, seeped into the twin's mind like poison. "We're one." The twin recoiled further, unable to stop his tremors. But then he saw it. A glimmer of something sharp in his brother's hand. A glint of silver. A knife. A blade. No. The twin tried to cry out, but it was too late. The shadow, his brother, lunged forward. The blade cut through the darkness, moving so fast the twin could barely track it. Pain erupted in his chest. A searing heat that flooded his veins. His limbs felt heavy, numb, but something inside him screamed. He was slipping again. The house, the entity, it had let him rise only to push him down. The knife twisted in his side, digging deep into the flesh he no longer fully owned. He felt his body unraveling, piece by piece, as the shadow pulled away. The twin couldn't fight it.
Couldn't stop it.
But in the last fragments of his awareness, he saw the truth. The house had a pattern. It would always feed. It had to. The twin's vision blurred as the darkness closed in on him. The whisper of the house came again. "You will return." But this time it was different. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a command. The twin's body jerked as the shadows around him thickened, growing heavier. He tried to speak, to scream, to break free, but the words died in his throat. And in the vast, suffocating dark, something new stirred. A flicker of hope. Or was it something worse? A realization that the twin would never truly be free. Not here. Not in the void. He was bound to the house. It would feed on him. It would shape him. And when it was done, it would send him back. To wait. For the next. The house never stopped. And neither would he. Welcome home. And then, there was nothing but the darkness. In the depths of the house, where time twisted and the very air felt thick with dread, the twin began to fade once more. But something shifted in the suffocating blackness. The faintest of tremors, like the very walls of the house were breathing, exhaling almost. The pain in his chest was still sharp, but it began to dull, like a fading memory. His senses, though still fractured, began to sharpen in the void. He could feel the cold floor beneath him, rough against the skin that no longer felt like his own. It was them, the house, the walls, the thing that lived here. It was watching him. He could feel its hunger, like claws scraping against his insides. But something inside him refused to fade away. It refused to be consumed. The twin opened his eyes, or at least he tried to. The darkness remained, but He could sense a flicker of light in the distance. A weak, fragile glimmer, as if a door had cracked open for just a moment. His pulse quickened. I can't go back, he thought. I can't. But he felt the pull. The house wasn't done with him. It never would be. Yet, there was a shift, a subtle change. The weight on his chest lessened. He could breathe again. For a moment, he felt something like control, faint, fleeting. A memory of what it was to be human. A spark of defiance. It's not over. A whisper of hope. It was faint, fragile, but it was enough to push him forward. He reached out, though his limbs felt like they were made of stone. The shadowy figures, the disembodied voices, they swirled around him, pulling, grasping. But still, he moved. Slowly, painfully, he moved toward the flickering light. Every inch felt like a mile. But with every step, the house recoiled. It shuddered. It wasn't used to this. The twin could feel it, its power waning, if only for a moment. His brother, the twisted version of him, the shadowed reflection, was gone for now. But that didn't mean the house had given up. He could hear it, feel it, whispering at the edge of his consciousness. You can't escape. You can't outrun what you are. But he kept going. The light was closer now, brighter, and for a brief moment, the twin thought he could see the outline of a door. A way out. It was just a sliver, a crack, but it was real. And so he pushed. His body fought against him, each movement aching, each breath burning. But something inside him refused. He reached for the light. And then, as his hand brushed the edges of the door, a horrible screeching sound filled the air. The house reacted. The walls buckled, cracked, as if the very foundation of reality was splitting apart. He felt it. Asterisk the house asterisk, clawing at his mind, at his soul, trying to pull him back. He saw the door. He was almost there. The space around him seemed to collapse, pulling him toward the center of the house like a black hole. But the light was so close. He gritted his teeth, willing himself to push through. The screeching grew louder, more desperate, as if the house itself was fighting to keep him. But in the last moments before the darkness swallowed him whole, the twin reached for that flicker of light, grasped it with everything he had left. And everything went white. For a brief, impossibly brief instant, there was no house, no shadows, no voices, just silence, just peace. And then, the darkness snapped back. The house had won. The twin wasn't free. He would never be free. But this time, when he awoke, he was not alone. He was surrounded by them, the other souls, the twisted, broken things. And together they waited for the next. The house was always hungry. And so they waited. The twin could feel them around him. The souls. The ones who had been here before him. Their presence was like an echo in the dark, a chorus of broken voices, all whispering in unison. You are one of us now. It was not a comfort. It was not a welcome. It was an acceptance. A fate sealed with the very walls of the house. The walls, the floors, the shadows, they were part of the house. And now he was part of them. He could hear them now, those voices, those wails, coming from all around him. They weren't just sounds. They were memories. Memories of lives long lost. Of the horrors that the house had inflicted. You're trapped here, like we are. The twin tried to move, but his body, his new form, refused to cooperate. He was not fully human anymore. He was something else. Something twisted. The house had changed him. The pain, the sharpness in his chest, it still pulsed. The coldness in his limbs, in his soul, wouldn't fade. And yet there was something else beneath it all. A distant feeling. A small spark of something different. Will you fight it? The question echoed in his mind. Would he? Could he? He could feel his broken self being pulled further into the house. It wasn't just a structure. It was alive. It wanted him. He could sense it now beneath the surface, its hunger, its insatiable need. It would never stop. It would never let him go. The twin tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the walls. The walls that whispered to him, "We are one." He could hear them now, asterisk the other star. The twisted reflections of those who had come before him. Somewhere deep within the house, a door slammed open. And for a moment, the twin thought he saw it, an exit. A crack in the walls. A way out. But before he could reach for it, before he could even move, the shadows closed in again.
Tighter.
No one escapes. The voice was familiar now, twisted into something unrecognizable. It was the house, or perhaps a part of it. It had taken his mind, his soul. It had taken everything. The twin wanted to cry out, wanted to fight. But what was there to fight against? The house had already won. It had claimed him. The memories of his brother, of his mother, flickered in his mind like shards of glass. Sharp.
Tearing.
They were all part of it now. Just like him. The hunger, the voices, they swirled around him. Thick and suffocating. You're one of us. You belong here. The twin felt it now, asterisk the change star. Something inside him, something dark and powerful, began to stir. It wasn't his old self, the boy who had once been alive. No, this was something else. Something more. And he realized, just before the darkness consumed him entirely. He wasn't just trapped in the house. He was the house. It had become him. And now he would wait. Wait for the next. Wait for the ones who would come to take his place. The house was always hungry. It would never stop. And neither would he. The twin faded into the walls, merging with the house, becoming a part of the unending cycle. And somewhere, far away, the door opened again. A new soul, unaware, stepped over the threshold. And the house waited. The house was always hungry. It never stopped. It never ceased to crave. And now, another soul had entered. A new victim, unaware, just as the twin had once been. He could feel it, the presence, the energy of the new arrival. The door opened, creaking just like it always had, and the faint scent of fresh fear filled the air. The twin, or whatever was left of him, was aware now, aware of the cycle, aware of his own twisted role. He could feel the house stirring. It had claimed him, but it wasn't satisfied. It would never be satisfied. The new arrival was coming closer now, the steps echoing in the empty hallways. The twin could feel their pulse, their breath, their confusion. He could feel the shiver of their spine as they entered, and the fear that began to grow in their chest, just as it had grown in his. The new soul wasn't alone, though. There were others with them, drawn in by the same call. But something was different this time. The house seemed stronger, hungrier. It was awake, alive in ways it hadn't been before. The twin could sense it. It was pulling them in. He could see their faces now, asterisk vivid asterisk in his mind. He knew them.
They didn't know yet.
They didn't realize what they were walking into. But he did. And as the new souls stepped deeper into the house, the twin felt it. The pull, the shift, the hunger rising within the walls. It was time again. The walls shuddered, and the house breathed. The shadows, thick as ever, began to shift and change, twisting into new shapes, new forms. They were coming. The other lost souls. They stirred beneath the surface, just like the twin had once been stirred. And for the briefest moment he felt something. A pang of regret. A fleeting thought that perhaps it didn't have to be this way. But it passed quickly, swallowed by the overwhelming force of the house. You belong here now. The whisper was familiar. You are part of the house. The twin had learned that there was no escape. There was only the cycle. There was only waiting. And now, he would wait, watching as the house did its work. As it claimed them. They'll be just like us, the twin thought. And in that moment, he felt something strange stir within him. An understanding. A purpose. The house needed them. It needed them to complete it, to feed it, to sustain it. It was alive, yes, but it fed on them. On fear. On despair. On their very souls. And when the next one entered, it would be like every other before them.
Drawn in.
Taken.
Changed.
Until the hunger called again. And the twin would be there. Waiting. A part of the house. A part of the cycle. Forever. In the cold, Dark hallways. A door opened again. And the house waited. The door creaked open with the same ominous groan it always did, a sound that reverberated deep within the very bones of the house. Another one. Another lost soul, stepping into the abyss, unaware of what awaited. The twins' awareness sharpened. He could feel their heartbeat, steady and loud against the silence. He could hear the shift in the air, the flutter of breath, the quickening pulse of someone who had not yet realized the weight of their mistake. They were young, this one, too young to know, too naive to see the truth. He felt a rush of something. Was it pity? Was it regret? But those emotions were fleeting. Faint. They were swallowed by the overwhelming presence of the house. The walls pulsed with hunger, vibrating with the need to feed.
Feed.
The twin knew that word now better than his own name. It was the heartbeat of the house. And the new arrival, had just walked right into its mouth. The house shifted. The shadows, thick and suffocating, began to grow, stretching further out into the hallways, following the steps of the new soul. But the twin, bound in this hellish place, couldn't reach them. He couldn't warn them. The house wouldn't let him. It wouldn't let any of them. The footsteps grew louder, closer. The scent of fear thickened. They could feel it now. The chill, the tightening of the air, the sudden weight on their chest. The twins' senses surged, and for the briefest moment, the walls of the house seemed to part in his mind. He could see them, the new arrival, an innocent, terrified figure standing at the crossroads of the endless corridor. They hesitated, looking around. Their breath was shallow, quick, and the twin could feel their growing dread, swirling like a storm. It's too late now, he thought. He wanted to scream, to warn them, but his voice would never reach them. They wouldn't hear him, and even if they did, it wouldn't matter. The door at the end of the hallway opened. A distant sound, a low hum, a screech, like 100 whispers merging into one, began to rise from deep within the walls. The twin knew it. He could feel it. The house was waking up. It was coming for them. And this time, the new soul would not escape. The air shifted again. The pressure increased. The twin's body began to ache in places he thought he'd forgotten about, the familiar sensation of pain twisting through his chest. It wasn't just physical. It was inside, in his very soul. The walls hummed with energy, the shadows crawling toward the newcomer like living things, their edges jagged and hungry. Run, the twin thought, but he knew it was useless. The house didn't allow running. Not anymore. The new arrival turned, their eyes wide with a first realization. Something was wrong. They had felt it. The cold. The darkness. The voices that now whispered to them. The walls began to close in. The hallway twisted and warped, the air thick with something ancient. There is no escape, the twin thought, his mind screaming against the reality of it. The new arrival's footsteps faltered, but it was too late. A scream ripped through the air, sharp and strangled. The twin could feel it, taste it. Fear, raw and unfiltered, flooding the hallways. It fed the house. It made it stronger. And as the walls quivered in anticipation, the house began to stretch out, reaching for the new arrival. It had them. The new soul was trapped. The twin could see it happening, the shadows enveloping them, pulling them into the darkness, swallowing them whole. The cries grew fainter, but the echo of their fear remained. And then, there was nothing. Only the silence of the house. Only the sound of the walls settling back into place. And the whisper, the endless whisper. Welcome home, The twin felt a wave of emptiness wash over him, but it was fleeting. The hunger had been fed, and the house was satisfied for now. But it would not stop. Not ever. The cycle would begin again. And somewhere, hidden in the endless corridors, the twin waited. He waited for the next door to open, for the next soul to step inside. The house would never stop. It was patient. It was hungry. And it always got what it wanted. The house waited. The walls hummed with quiet anticipation, as if it knew that sooner or later another would come. Another would walk through the door, unaware of the nightmare waiting inside. The twin could feel it. The pulse of the house was steady, constant. The cycles never stopped. But something was different now. Something that had been buried deep inside him, a fragment of his former self, of his humanity, stirred. It was faint, barely noticeable, but it was there, and it made him question everything. Could he still feel? Could he still remember what it was like to be alive? To have hope? The hunger within him, the hunger that had once driven him to become part of the house, began to feel wrong. It wasn't just the house's insatiable need that gnawed at him now. It was his own. A gnawing, aching sense of something lost, something precious, something that made him feel human once more. For the first time since his arrival in this place, he felt something akin to pain. Not the kind the house had given him, the physical ache that gnawed at his limbs and twisted his body into shapes it was never meant to take.
No.
This pain was different. It was a kind of emptiness, a hollowness that felt wrong. He couldn't explain it. He just knew it was there. The twins' thoughts spiraled, clawing against the very boundaries the house had built around his mind. Was it a memory? A whisper from his past life? His brother? His mother? He couldn't remember anymore. The memories were fading, slipping like water through his fingers, but the feeling, the ache, was all too real. And it was growing stronger.
Why?
Why did he feel this way now? He hadn't felt it before, not when he was first pulled into the house, when it had consumed him completely.
But now.
He was beginning to fight. The twins' awareness sharpened once more. The house wasn't just a trap. It was a living, breathing thing, and he was a part of it. But could he still break free? The air around him thickened. A distant whisper stirred in his mind. You belong here. It was the same voice that had spoken to him before. But now it sounded different. No, he thought, I don't belong here. The twin's body twitched, as if he had just woken from a deep sleep. A primal force surged within him. A force he hadn't known he still had. It wasn't just his desire to escape. It was something deeper, something more violent. The walls around him quivered in response, the house sensing a shift, its hunger growing. But this time, the twin didn't cower.
He didn't retreat.
He pushed back. I won't be a part of you anymore. The twin's mind screamed out, I refuse. He felt the force within the house, a dark, overwhelming entity, rattle at his defiance. It was like the weight of the walls themselves pressed against his thoughts, trying to crush him, but the resistance within him only grew. This is not my fate. A flicker of the light he had once seen, when he had almost escaped, came to his mind. It was faint, a mere spark, but it felt like a beacon in the endless darkness. Can I escape? The thought was almost laughable. Could he? Could he really break free from this place? The house, sensing his intent, began to tremble, the shadows shifting around him like snakes coiling in preparation. It wasn't used to this. It wasn't used to resistance. You are nothing without us, the house whispered, its voice now sharp, frayed with anger. But the twin didn't listen. He couldn't afford to. He could feel the power of the house, the way it twisted and turned inside his mind, trying to pull him back into the suffocating void of its influence. But with every ounce of will he could summon, the twin fought it. He reached for that sliver of light, that memory, that hope. It was his last chance. The walls screamed in fury as the house tried to consume him once again. But the twin, he refused. And for the first time, the darkness around him began to recede. The house, in all its ancient hunger, faltered. Just for a moment. But it was enough. Enough to give him the sliver of hope he needed. And in that fragile moment of clarity, the twin ran. He ran through the shifting corridors, the shadows clawing at him, but he ran. And the house, it could feel him slipping away.
No.
The house roared in fury, its voice a wave of agony that crashed against him. But it was too late. The twin pushed forward, beyond the suffocating darkness, towards the light. And just as he thought he had reached the edge of the void, the door swung open, and he stepped through. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he felt air, real air, fill his lungs. He was outside. The house was behind him, but the twin knew, deep in his soul, the house was never done. It would always be waiting, always hungry. And somewhere, in the depths of that cursed place, the cycle would begin again. The twin stood there, breathless, outside the house, staring at the looming structure behind him. For the first time in so long, he felt the cold bite of the night air against his skin. It was sharp, real. But it wasn't freedom. Not truly. The house was still there, a dark silhouette against the dim sky, its windows staring back at him like hollow eyes. It was waiting. It was alive. And no matter how far he ran, no matter how many doors he crossed, he knew deep inside, he could never escape. The house had marked him, and something about it had claimed him in a way he couldn't understand. He could still feel the pull, the tug at the very core of his being. It was faint now, but it was there, in the air, in the ground beneath his feet. It was the memory of the house, the echo of its hunger, the darkness that had touched him, that had consumed him. He turned, his feet unwilling to move forward. But in the distance behind the house, something flickered. A light, small, flickering like a candle flame on the horizon. At first, he thought it was a trick of his mind. But then, the light grew, brighter and stronger, as if something or someone was beckoning him. It was distant, far beyond the house, but he felt its pull. His heart raced. He had to know. The twin hesitated. Could it be real? Could there be hope beyond the house? His legs moved before he could think, drawn toward the light, as if his body knew the path his mind was too afraid to take. Every step felt like a small victory. The further he moved, the weaker the pull of the house became. The shadows, those cold, twisted figures, no longer lurked just out of reach. He kept moving. Faster now, driven by something he couldn't quite grasp, something more powerful than the fear that had shackled him for so long. The ground beneath him shifted, softening as if the earth itself were willing him forward. He reached the edge of the trees, the light still glimmering ahead. And then, in an instant, he was there. A small cabin stood in front of him, bathed in soft, golden light. It felt warm, as if it had been waiting for him. The door stood slightly ajar, a welcome. He pushed it open. Inside, there was a fire, crackling in the hearth. The scent of wood and earth, fresh air and warmth. A table sat in the center of the room, set for one. There was a plate of food, still steaming, as though someone had been waiting. The twin stepped forward, his hands shaking. It felt wrong. He hadn't been expecting this. This sense of peace, of calm. It was too easy, but it was so real. He looked around, searching for any sign of a trap, any indication that this was just another twisted illusion of the house. But there was nothing. Nothing but the warmth. And the light. For the first time in what felt like forever, the twin sat at the table. The air around him felt almost gentle. The weight that had been pressing against his chest for so long began to lift. But just as he reached for the plate, the door slammed shut behind him. The sudden sound echoed through the room like a death knell. His heart skipped a beat. The warmth, the peacefulness, all began to fade. The air turned cold. The shadows, like tendrils, crept around the corners of the room. And in the stillness, he heard it. A whisper, soft, but unmistakable. You can never escape. The twin spun around, his heart hammering in his chest. The house, it was here again. It had followed him. It had always been with him. The walls of the cabin began to warp, stretching out of shape, bending and groaning like the house itself was closing in around him. The flickering light in the hearth dimmed, and in its place, shadows writhed, growing darker, thicker. The voice, the same voice that had haunted him all this time, whispered again, louder now. You belong to us. The twin backed away, his breath quickening, his mind spinning. He had thought he had escaped. He had believed that the house had finally let go. But now he understood. The house didn't just claim bodies. It claimed souls. It consumed them, Asterisk changed asterisk them, and they would never be free. Not until the house had fed. The walls cracked open, revealing the endless darkness inside. The twin could feel it, the pull, the hunger, rising again within him. Asterisk, no. Asterisk, he thought, but the word felt hollow. He was no longer sure if it was his own. He tried to run. But the floor beneath him was no longer solid. It felt like quicksand, sucking him in, pulling him back. And as he struggled, the house claimed him once more. This time, there would be no escape. Not now. Not ever. He was its. And it was his. Forever. The door to the cabin slammed shut with a deafening crash. And the darkness inside swallowed everything. The darkness closed in like a heavy blanket, smothering all sense of time and space. The twin's struggle slowed as the grip of the house tightened around him, its cold fingers pulling him deeper. His body felt heavy, as though the very air was thickened with sorrow, with regret. There was no escape. Not now. Not ever. But even in the suffocating blackness, a small part of him, what was left of him, fought. It fought with a desperation that only the truly broken could know. A sharp, jagged feeling pierced his thoughts, reminding him of what he once was, of what the house had taken. His humanity. His brother. Mother. The images flickered in his mind, fragments of memories torn and distorted like a shredded photograph. They had been the ones to push him here. The ones who had made him feel so powerless. So invisible. The house had fed on that. It had consumed his fear, his anger, and left him a hollow shell. But now, as he sank deeper into the abyss, something inside him cracked open. A surge of rage and pain ripped through him. He couldn't tell if it was his own will, or something darker, something that had been awakened in the depths of his soul. But in that moment, the darkness didn't feel like home. It felt like a trap. And for the first time, he wanted to break free. The twin's hands clenched into fists. The air around him, thick with the stench of the house's power, started to crackle. He could hear the walls groaning, as if the house itself was unsure of what was happening. Something was shifting. The twin opened his eyes. There was no light, no warmth, just the heavy weight of the house pressing in on all sides. But he could feel it. The house was beginning to fray. The pull of it had started to loosen just a little. He could sense the fear, the uncertainty in its walls. The hunger was still there, but it was weaker. And in that weakness, he saw an opportunity. I can break it. The thought was foreign, yet familiar. A buried instinct, something that came from deep within the darkness. It wasn't the house that had shaped him. He had shaped it. The twin reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold walls. A surge of energy coursed through him. He didn't know how, but he could feel it, his connection to the house. It was a bond, deep and painful, forged in blood and fear. But it was also a link. A crack in the very foundation of the house itself. And with that crack, he saw his chance. With everything in him, the twin forced himself to focus. He pulled. Not just at the walls, but at the very essence of the house. Its darkness. Its hunger. He reached for it, twisted it in his hands, and squeezed. The house screamed. A guttural, deafening wail that shook the very core of the earth. The walls trembled, cracking and splintering as if they were alive, caught in the twin's grip. For the first time, the twin felt power. Not the power of the house, but his own. The power to break it. The house fought back. It clawed and pulled, trying to swallow him whole, but the twin held on. He wasn't just a part of it anymore. He was changing it. He was fighting for control. And for the first time, the house couldn't keep up. The hunger was no longer in charge. The twin was. The walls cracked again, this time violently, splintering like glass under a hammer. The shadows writhed, shrieking in terror as they were torn apart. A blinding light began to pierce through the cracks in the walls, flooding the darkness with blinding, pure white. The twin gasped as the light overwhelmed him, flooding his body with heat. And in that light, something shattered. The walls, the house, the very essence of it collapsed. The twin was thrown back. The force of the release was so powerful that it felt like an explosion. The house. It was breaking. No, it was dying. The twin gasped for breath as the walls around him dissolved into nothingness, leaving behind only the remnants of the house. He stood on the precipice of a new reality. The shadows had receded. The darkness was gone. The twin was free. But something remained. A small voice, deep inside his mind. You can never truly escape. The twin froze. For just a moment, he felt the weight of those words again, like a stone lodged in his chest. But now he understood. It wasn't the house that held him. It was him. The fear. The hunger. The need. It would always be with him. He could never outrun it. But he had the power to fight, to break free. And that was enough. For now, the house was gone. But its legacy remained. In the twin, and in the darkness. Somewhere far in the distance, another door creaked open, and the cycle began again. The twin stood at the edge of the shattered void, breathing heavily, his body trembling from the exertion. The remnants of the house were fading, disintegrating like ash blown by an unforgiving wind. But as the darkness slowly unraveled, something else began to stir, an emptiness, deep and cold, that gnawed at his very soul. He had won. He had broken the house. Or had he? The ground beneath him was solid, yes, but it felt thin. Like he was standing at the edge of a fragile illusion, ready to collapse at the slightest touch. The air around him had changed. It was no longer oppressive, heavy with the weight of the house's presence. But it was still wrong. The twin tried to steady himself, but the feeling was creeping in. The whispering emptiness. He could still hear the echoes of the house's voice, faint but insistent. You can never truly escape. The words, like a cold hand on the back of his neck, crawled up his spine, settling into his chest. It wasn't the house anymore. It wasn't the walls. It was something far worse. It was himself. He could feel it. The hunger, the ache that had always been there, buried beneath layers of fear and confusion. Even now, after everything, it still pulsed within him. He could taste it. A longing. A craving. The void had been his home. And even though it was gone, the emptiness inside him remained. The twin stumbled back, shaking his head, trying to shake off the suffocating pull of the darkness inside him.
No.
He couldn't let it take him again. He couldn't become it. But the whisper persisted, and in the depths of his mind, he heard a voice, not his own, but something darker, something ancient. It's always been you. His heart raced. The ground beneath him began to tremble. The light, the last remnants of the house's destruction, began to flicker. A distant rumble echoed through the air, like thunder, but closer. No, the twin thought desperately, pushing against the wave of despair that crashed against him. I won't go back. But the darkness, it was already creeping back in. The light that had once filled him now felt like an illusion, a fleeting spark that was being swallowed by the very thing he had fought so hard to escape. The hunger in his chest grew. It was growing stronger, filling him. And just like that, he realized he had never truly been free. The house had been a reflection of his deepest fears, his worst desires. And now that the house was gone, it wasn't the house that was left behind. It was him. The twin fell to his knees, his breath ragged, his hands clutching at his chest as the pain and hunger surged within him. It was like fire, raw, relentless, tearing him apart from the inside out. He could hear the whispers louder now, the walls of his mind closing in.
Feed. Consume.
Become one with the darkness. His body trembled as he tried to push it away, but it was too much. Too powerful. The hunger had never left. It had only been waiting. Always waiting. The twin squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the pull, but in the depths of his mind, the truth was undeniable. He was the house. The hunger was him. And he was it. He gasped as the darkness took over completely. It flooded his mind, his body, turning him inside out. The world around him shifted, the light of the fading wreckage of the house dimming into oblivion. There was nothing now. Nothing but the endless craving. And the twin knew, with terrible clarity, that he could never escape. For the house had never been about walls or doors or rooms. It had always been about him. The twin had become the cycle, the hunger. And somewhere, deep inside, he knew that when the next soul stumbled into the void, he would be there, waiting, ready, to consume,
To claim.
forever. And as the darkness closed in, his last thought was a whisper, a voice that wasn't his own, but had always been with him. It's always been you. And with that, the cycle began again. The twin stood motionless in the heart of the endless void, surrounded by the shattered remnants of the house, the very air trembling with the echoes of its destruction. But it wasn't over. Not yet. In the distance, the faintest glimmer of light began to pierce the oppressive darkness, like a forgotten star waking from its long sleep. The twin couldn't tell if it was real or another illusion. He couldn't tell if it was a sign of hope, or if it was just another trap, another cruel twist in this never-ending nightmare. But the hunger inside him, that gnawing, all-consuming need, flared up in response. The light beckoned him. It had always been there, just beyond reach. A glimmer of something more than darkness. The twin's fingers twitched, and for the first time since the house's grip had swallowed him, he felt the faintest stir of something different. Could it be? He didn't dare hope. He'd been fooled before, but that light, so pure, so alive, stirred something deep within him. Could he choose to walk toward it? Could he will himself free? His mind raced, the memories of his past life flooding back in fractured images. His brother, his mother, his past self, the boy who had once dreamed of a world outside this cursed place. The twin's breath caught in his throat as the light grew stronger, now shining brightly through the darkness. This time, the hunger didn't surge. This time, he resisted. With a determination he hadn't known he still had, he began to move. Slowly, carefully, he walked toward the light. It felt as though the very fabric of reality was bending around him, the darkness recoiling at his approach, like a beast that had lost its grip on its prey. The ground beneath him no longer felt like quicksand. It felt solid, real. And as the twin took each step, he realized the truth. The house had always been a reflection of what he feared. It had consumed him, twisted him, but it had never truly owned him. The light grew brighter still, until it enveloped him, wrapping around him like a warm embrace. And in that moment, the hunger was gone. The emptiness faded. For the first time in what felt like forever, the twin fell whole. And as he stepped into the light, the darkness finally receded, vanishing like smoke in the wind. He was free. The house was gone. And for the first time in years, the twin was truly at peace. The twin stood at the threshold of the light, his body trembling, but his mind clear for the first time in years. The oppressive weight of the house had vanished. The suffocating darkness was gone, leaving only the soft, gentle glow that enveloped him now. The hunger, that insatiable craving that had once driven him to the brink of madness, was silent. He felt lighter, as if the very air around him had become breathable again. The emptiness inside, no longer an abyss, no longer a void, was filled with something else. Something whole. For the first time in what felt like forever, he could breathe without the constant gnawing, without the pain. There were no shadows. No whispers. Just peace. The twin exhaled, feeling the weight in his chest lift, a sensation so unfamiliar yet so right. The memories of the house, the twisted walls, the suffocating hunger, the screams of those who had been lost within, began to fade. They were still there, fragments in the back of his mind, but they no longer controlled him. The light wasn't just an escape. It was freedom. He stepped forward, each movement feeling more deliberate, more grounded, as though he was walking into a world that was truly his own. The light around him shifted, becoming brighter, warmer, as though it were welcoming him, offering him a place to rest. And as he passed through the glow, he found himself standing in a place that was real, a place that felt alive. The air was crisp with the scent of trees, of earth, of the outside world. the world he had been denied for so long. He looked around, and for the first time, he felt as though he had come home. The world was vast, stretching out before him in an expanse of untold possibilities. There was nothing left to bind him. No house, no hunger, no past. Just a new beginning. For the first time, the twins smiled. And in that moment he understood. He wasn't just free from the house, he was free from himself. From the darkness that had once defined him. And as he took the first step into the unknown, he knew the journey ahead would not be easy, but it would be his. His to shape. His to live. And as the sun rose on the horizon, the twins' hearts swelled with the one thing he had not felt in a lifetime. Hope. For the first time in years, the future was his to own.